I always knew I wasn't meant to live in a place where someone else told me what color my front door could be. Growing up in a neighborhood controlled by an HOA, I had a front row seat to just how absurd and soul-crushing it could be. Every house on our street was a variation of the same dull design, different shades of beige, the same neatly trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes lined up like soldiers. It wasn't a bad place to live, not really. It was just controlled, sterile, and lifeless. Neighbors didn't talk to each other beyond polite nods. No one lingered outside unless they were watching to make sure someone else followed the rules. Rules that seemed to exist just for the sake of making life a little more miserable. I was 8 the first time I saw just how ridiculous those rules could be. My dad forgot to bring in the trash bins after pickup, and by the time he got home, there was a violation notice taped to our door, a $1.50 fine for having the garbage cans out 5 minutes past the acceptable retrieval window. I still remember the way my father fumed, tossing the notice onto the counter like a traffic ticket. That was my first real introduction to the HOA's absurdity. Later, I found out that a neighbor got fined because their garden hose wasn't rolled up the approved way. Another woman was issued a violation because her mailbox was slightly darker than the others on the street. That was the moment I knew I wanted out. I didn't want to live in a place where some clipboard-wielding control freak got to decide what I could and couldn't do with my own home. I wanted space, real space, not a tiny, fenced-in square of manicured grass masquerading as a backyard. I wanted land. That longing started the first time I visited my grandfather's farm. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old farmhouse with creaky wooden floors, a weathered red barn, and open land as far as I could see. The grass grew wild, the field stretched into the horizon, and there were no uniform mailboxes, no HOA letters taped to the door, no ridiculous fines for existing. I remember sitting on the porch next to my grandfather, watching the sun sink behind the rolling fields in streaks of orange and violet. At night, the stars looked different out there, untouched by city lights, so bright and endless that it felt like you could reach up and grab them. I loved it. I spent summers running barefoot through the fields, climbing trees, fixing fences, and feeding chickens. I even learned how to milk a cow once. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And the best part? No one told us what we could or couldn't do, but visiting was one thing, living there was another, my parents were practical people. My dad worked in insurance, my mom handled bookkeeping, and everything about our lives followed a predictable rhythm. School, homework, dinner, bed. Rinse and repeat, there was no room for what-ifs or maybe one days. The path was clear, go to college, get a degree, land a stable job, buy a house in a nice neighborhood, and settle down, So, that's exactly what I did. I went to business school, not because I loved it, but because it seemed like the safest option. I graduated, took an office job, and moved into a tiny apartment in the city. It was fine. My paycheck covered the bills. There was a coffee shop downstairs, a gym within walking distance, and a grocery store around the corner. Everything was convenient, everything was easy. And yet, I felt like I was suffocating. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of traffic instead of birds. I commuted in crowded subway cars, squeezed between strangers who looked just as exhausted as I felt. I spent my days in a cubicle, staring at spreadsheets, pretending to care about numbers that meant nothing to me. Then I came home, microwaved dinner, and repeated the cycle the next day. I was existing, but I wasn't living. That was when I started reading about people who had done what I wanted to do, people who had left the city behind, bought land, and built a life on their own terms. I devoured memoirs about homesteading, about people who had built cabins with their bare hands, farmed, and lived off the land. These weren't just stories to me. They were proof that it was possible. So, I started planning. Every extra dollar went into savings. No vacations, no expensive nights out, just a relentless focus on one goal: buy land. Every day, I scrolled through real estate listings, searching for the perfect place. Something rural. Something quiet. Something as far away from an HOA as humanly possible, ***. Then, one day, I found it. A simple listing. Farmhouse. 3 bedrooms. Barn. 10 acres. Needs work, ***. I clicked on the photos. The house was old, but sturdy, the barn was weathered but solid, and the land? It stretched out in every direction, wild and uncontained. It wasn't much. But it was perfect. I moved in on a crisp autumn morning, my truck loaded with the essentials, a mattress, a few boxes of clothes, and a beat-up coffee maker. The place needed work, but it was mine, no nosy neighbors, no matching beige houses, no one telling me what I could or couldn't do. The first thing I did was paint the front door a deep, rich blue, because I could. It felt almost rebellious after years of living under strict HOA rules where even a slightly different shade of paint could spark an outrage. As I stood back, admiring my work, I breathed in the open air, a mix of earth and damp leaves. Life on the farm wasn't easy, but every exhausting day left me satisfied. I woke up early, chopped wood to keep the place warm, and spent my afternoons clearing out the overgrown garden behind the house. I fixed broken fences, cleaned up the barn, and started planting the first few rows of vegetables. I even bought a couple of goats, Billy and Clyde to help with the grass. They were stubborn little troublemakers, but they kept me company, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It wasn't until 3 months in that the first letter arrived. I found it tucked between a stack of junk mail, an official-looking envelope with bold black lettering, Homeowners Association Violation Notice. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the previous owner had forgotten to update their address. I tore it open, my eyes scanning the words, my stomach twisting as I read. Dear homeowner, you are in violation of the following HOA regulations. Unauthorized paint color, unapproved shade of blue. Excessive lawn growth, grass exceeds 2 inches. Unauthorized livestock, livestock not permitted on residential properties. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines of $50 per day. Failure to respond may result in legal action. I let out a laugh, a sharp, disbelieving sound, this had to be a joke. I wasn't part of an HOA. I had specifically bought this land to avoid this exact nightmare, but just to be sure, I pulled out my property deed and double-checked. No mention of an HOA. No regulations. Nothing, Figuring it was a simple mistake, I dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and businesslike. Homeowners Association, this is Natalie speaking. There was something in her tone that immediately set me on edge. She sounded like the kind of person who got way too much enjoyment out of rules. Yeah, hey, I said, keeping my voice polite. I just got a violation notice from your HOA, but I think there's been a mistake. My property isn't part of an HOA. There was a pause. A long one. Like she was already preparing for a fight. Our records indicate that your property falls within the HOA's jurisdiction. I exhaled sharply, gripping the phone tighter. Yeah, that's funny because my deed says otherwise. I own this land outright, no HOA, no fees, no rules. So whatever records you're looking at are wrong. Another pause, then a slow, condescending sigh. Sir, all properties in this area are required to comply with HOA guidelines. Non-compliance will result in fines and potential legal action. My jaw clenched. So, let me get this straight. You're trying to fine me for livestock, my grass, and my paint color, on property that isn't even under your control? She didn't even hesitate. Sir, refusal to comply will result in escalating fines and a possible lien on your property. I let out a slow breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't a mistake, this was a power trip. I leaned against my kitchen counter, forcing my voice to stay calm. Well, Natalie, you go right ahead and try. But I'm not paying a dime. Then, before she could get another word in, I hung up. I stared at the letter on my table for a long time, feeling a slow burn of anger creep into my chest. This wasn't just some mix-up. This was the start of a fight. The next morning, a second letter arrived. This time, it wasn't just a violation notice. It was a fine, $50 per day until I complied, By the end of the week, the fines had escalated to $100 per day. By the second week, $200. Every single day, a new envelope showed up in my mailbox, like clockwork. It felt like extortion, a relentless push to break me down until I gave in. But that wasn't happening. If they thought I was just going to roll over and pay them, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Then, things got worse. One afternoon, I was outside, repainting my fence, when I noticed a group of 4 people standing at the edge of my property. They all had clipboards. I set down my brush, wiping my hands on my jeans before walking over. Can I help you? A bald man with tiny glasses cleared his throat. We're conducting a compliance check. I laughed, shaking my head. For what? For the HOA regulations, he said matter-of-factly, like I was the idiot here. I crossed my arms, my patience wearing thin. I'm not in the HOA. The woman next to him, a sharp-faced blonde with the energy of someone who left too many 1-star Yelp reviews, adjusted her clipboard. We've received multiple complaints about your property. I raised an eyebrow. Really? From who? She hesitated. We can't disclose that information. Right, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. And what exactly is the problem with my property? She flipped through her papers dramatically. Your barn is too visible from the road. I blinked. My barn? Yes, she said, nodding. It disrupts the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. I stared at her, wondering if she actually believed the words coming out of her mouth. It's a farm. That's what barns are for. The bald guy sighed like I was being difficult. There's also the issue of your lawn. I pinched the bridge of my nose. What about it? It's too natural. I nearly laughed. Too natural? The HOA requires all lawns to be uniformly trimmed to a maximum height of 2 inches. I gestured to the 10 acres of land stretching behind me. You want me to mow all of this to exactly 2 inches? He nodded solemnly, like he was delivering some royal decree. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, I was in the HOA, which I'm not. What happens if I just ignore all of this? The blonde woman smirked. Non-compliance will result in escalating fines. If unpaid, a lien can be placed on your property. Eventually, it could be foreclosed upon. I exhaled slowly. These people were insane. And this? This was war. The first real sign that the HOA wasn't backing down came 2 days later. I was drinking my morning coffee when I noticed a car parked just down the road, a black sedan with tinted windows. It wasn't one of my neighbors, and it sure as hell wasn't a lost tourist. The driver just sat there, staring at my property. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, waiting to see if they'd make a move. They didn't. After a few minutes, the car rolled forward, creeping past my driveway before disappearing down the road. I figured it was some nosy board member checking up on me, but when I spotted a different car in the same spot the next morning, then another that evening, I knew this wasn't just paranoia. They were watching me. But I didn't have time to deal with HOA stalkers because the next attack came fast. A thick stack of letters arrived in my mailbox, more violation notices, more fines, more legal threats. But buried in the pile was something worse, a notification from the county zoning office stating that my property lines were being re-evaluated due to a recent jurisdiction claim. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the county office, where a bored-looking clerk barely glanced up as I shoved the letter across the desk. "Yeah, looks like your neighborhood HOA submitted a boundary adjustment request," she said, scrolling through her computer. "They're claiming your land should fall under their jurisdiction due to a, let's see, clerical oversight in past records." I clenched my jaw. Clerical oversight, my ass. "And if this gets approved?" I asked. She shrugged. "Then your property would be officially governed by the HOA. I let out a sharp laugh, a humorless sound that barely concealed my rage. "And when was I supposed to be notified of this?" She looked at the letter in my hand, then back at her screen. "Looks like this is your notification." I gritted my teeth and left before I said something that got me kicked out of a government office. They were trying to steal my land through paperwork, but if they thought I was just going to sit back and let it happen, they had another thing coming. I called my lawyer, Maggie, the second I got home. "Oh, they're bold," she said, sounding almost impressed. "Filing a fraudulent jurisdiction claim? That's next-level HOA corruption. Can we stop it?" I asked. "Absolutely," she said. "But we need to move fast before it gets processed." I agreed to meet her the next day, but before I could even process one battle, another one blindsided me. The next morning, I was hauling feed to the barn when I noticed a white animal control truck pulling up my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, one of them holding a clipboard. "Morning," the taller one said, giving me a nod. "We've received multiple complaints about neglected and unauthorized livestock on the property. We need to conduct an inspection." I laughed under my breath. "Let me guess, those complaints came from the HOA?" The officer glanced at his clipboard. "Can't disclose that information, sir." "Right." I crossed my arms. "Well, you can go ahead and take a look, but my goats are fine." The 2 of them walked the property, checking on Billy and Clyde, who were currently munching on weeds, completely unbothered. After a few minutes, the shorter officer sighed, clearly annoyed. "Yeah, these animals are in good condition. No issues here." "Great," I said. "Then I assume I won't be hearing about this again?" The taller officer hesitated. "Well, technically, HOA guidelines prohibit livestock within residential zones." I cut him off, stepping forward. "I am not in the HOA. And if I get one more visit like this, I'm filing harassment complaints." That seemed to do the trick. The officers left, but I knew this wouldn't be the last time. Then, they escalated. A few days later, my mail stopped coming. Bills, legal notices, even personal letters, nothing, I went to the post office, where the clerk informed me that my mail service had been suspended due to property non-compliance. I stared at her. I didn't know the post office was run by the HOA now. She frowned. "They sent an official request. Something about security concerns and property eligibility." I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. The HOA had actually petitioned to cut off my mail service. I drove home fuming, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This wasn't just about fines or control anymore. They were trying to isolate me. No legal notices meant I could miss deadlines, no bills meant I could default, no warnings meant they could blindside me with foreclosure threats. That night, I built a massive sign at the entrance of my driveway. 12 feet wide, bold black letters on a bright yellow background asterisk. "This property is not part of the HOA. Stop trespassing. Stop harassment ***. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I made damn sure it was visible from the road. And for a few days, everything went quiet. Then she showed up. Natalie. I was working on the fence when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A shiny black SUV pulled into my driveway, and out stepped the queen of the HOA herself. She was dressed like she was headed to a business meeting, her heels completely impractical for a farm. She stormed up to my fence, her face twisted in irritation. "This," she snapped, jabbing a manicured finger toward my sign, "is unacceptable." I leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "No, Natalie. You're unacceptable." Her jaw tightened. "You need to take this down immediately. It's an eyesore and violates community aesthetic standards." I barked out a laugh. "I'm not in your community, remember?" She exhaled sharply, like she was trying to keep herself from screaming. "If you refuse to comply, we will escalate this matter legally." I grinned. "Go for it." She glared at me for a long moment, then spun on her heel and marched back to her SUV. Before she drove off, she shot me one last look. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Because she knew. She was losing. The first real punch landed a few days later when I walked out to find a demolition crew parked at the edge of my property. A large construction truck sat idling beside them, and standing in front of it was a man in a neon vest, clipboard in hand, studying my barn like it was already rubble. I dropped my coffee mug on the porch. "What the hell is this?" The man barely glanced up. "You Ethan?" "Yeah. And you're trespassing." He flipped through a few pages on his clipboard and let out a disinterested grunt. "Got an order here for demolition of a non-compliant structure. Says the property is under HOA jurisdiction." I saw red. "You've got the wrong property." "Orders came from the HOA," he said with a shrug, gesturing toward a printed document. "Barn doesn't meet aesthetic standards." Aesthetic standards? They were trying to bulldoze my damn barn. "You touch one board of that barn, and I'll have the sheriff out here so fast your head will spin," I snapped. He frowned. "Look, man, I don't care about HOA politics. I just do the work I'm assigned. You got paperwork saying this is a mistake?" I stalked back into my house, grabbed my property deed, legal documents, and the cease and desist letter my lawyer sent to the HOA, and slammed them against his clipboard. "There. My barn stays." The man sighed, rubbing his temples before muttering something into his radio. After a minute, he waved his crew off, mumbling about wasting his time as they packed up and drove away. But the damage was already done. The HOA had escalated to outright attempted destruction of my property. I called Maggie, my lawyer, the second they were gone. "They're getting desperate," she said after I filled her in. "But they just made a huge mistake. If they issued an unauthorized demolition request, that's legal fraud. Can we hit them back?" "Oh, we can do more than that," she said, her voice almost gleeful. "But I have a feeling they aren't done yet." She was right. 2 days later, I came home to find a notice taped to my front door. The moment I saw the words "Final Eviction Notice" in bold red letters, my hands shook with rage. The document claimed my property was now under HOA foreclosure due to unpaid fines that had exceeded the legal threshold. It stated I had 72 hours to vacate before legal action was taken. At the bottom was the HOA's letterhead, and Natalie's signature. I barely had time to process that before my phone buzzed with an email notification. A real estate listing. For my house. They had actually listed my home for sale. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. The listing was live, a full set of photos, my address, the price. And the seller? The HOA. They had filed the foreclosure paperwork as if it had already gone through. I grabbed my keys and sped toward Maggie's office, my fingers clenched so tightly around the steering wheel they ached. When I stormed in, she took one look at my face and sighed. "What now?" I shoved my phone toward her. "They put my house up for sale." Her eyes widened as she clicked through the listing. Then, slowly, a dark grin spread across her face. "Oh, they just screwed themselves." "How?" "Because this isn't just HOA overreach anymore," she said, flipping her laptop open. "This is fraud, illegal foreclosure, and property theft. They don't have the authority to list your home, which means they just committed real estate fraud. And guess what?" She spun her laptop toward me, the reflection of a legal database glowing on the screen. "This isn't the first time they've done it." I leaned in. "What do you mean?" She scrolled through a series of past cases, all tied to the HOA. "They've been running this scam for years. Falsifying violations, stacking fake fines, pushing homeowners into foreclosure, then flipping the properties for profit." She clicked on one case file. "See this? They did the same thing to an elderly couple last year. They sold the house out from under them before they even knew what was happening." My stomach turned. "And they're trying to do it to me." She nodded. "But now? We have everything we need to blow this wide open." I exhaled, my fists tightening. "So what's next?" Her grin widened. "We burn them to the ground." The fallout came faster than I expected. Maggie wasted no time. By the next morning, the HOA was hit with legal notices from multiple directions. She filed a harassment complaint with the county, a fraud report with the state real estate board, and a cease and desist order demanding the removal of my property listing. But the real blow came when she reported Natalie's false police complaint to Internal Affairs. That was the moment things started to crumble. At the next HOA board meeting, I walked in with Maggie and a stack of legal documents so thick it could stop a bullet. The room was chaos. The board members weren't just arguing anymore, they were panicking. Some had no idea what Natalie had been doing behind their backs, while others, realizing they had hitched their wagon to a sinking ship, were scrambling to distance themselves. Russell, the senior board member who had been indifferent before, now looked pale as he read through the documents Maggie laid on the table. He turned to Natalie, his voice shaking, "You told us this was just a compliance issue." Natalie's carefully curated mask of superiority cracked. I was just enforcing." "You filed a fake foreclosure, Natalie," Maggie interrupted, tapping the fraudulent property listing. "You tried to sell a home you didn't own. That's real estate fraud. That's a felony." The silence that followed was absolute. Russell turned to the other board members. "We're voting," he said, his voice firm. "Now." It wasn't even close. The vote to remove Natalie was unanimous. As Russell read the final count, Natalie's face turned red, her hands shaking. She looked at me, fury and desperation burning in her eyes. "This is your fault." I just smiled. "You already lost." She stormed out, but I knew this wasn't just the end of her reign. It was the end of the HOA as it had existed. Over the next few weeks, Maggie made sure the board repealed every single fraudulent fine and officially removed my property from their jurisdiction. But it didn't stop there. The county launched an investigation into past fraudulent foreclosures, and before long, several other homeowners who had been targeted came forward. The HOA wasn't just reformed, it was gutted. Russell took over as president and personally apologized, offering to fix the damage Natalie had done. I didn't want to be part of an HOA, but for the first time, I saw something I never thought possible, a neighborhood that wasn't ruled by fear, but by actual community. When Russell invited me to a neighborhood barbecue, I almost said no. After all the fights, the violations, the battles over my land, why would I want to be around these people? But then I saw them, neighbors who had once avoided me, now shaking my hand. People who had been afraid to speak up, now thanking me for exposing the truth. And for the first time since I moved in, I didn't feel like I was standing alone on my land. I never wanted an HOA. I still don't. But if I had to fight to make it better, at least I knew I had made sure no one else would be bullied into silence again. And as I stood by the grill, beer in hand, watching people laugh and talk, I wondered how many others had been steamrolled by HOA power plays, too scared or too exhausted to fight back. Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.